Okay, so it is finally time for my overall thoughts on the Human Centipede Trilogy. I have gone through the plot of all three of the main movies, so if you want to check those out, you are welcome to. But now it's kind of time to give my overall thoughts of each individual movie, give them each a letter grade, and just give my final thoughts on the series. And yeah, so let's start off with the Human Centipede 1. So the Human Centipede 1 is definitely part of pop culture. Everyone knows what it is. It's mentioned in so many movies, like Deadpool 2. It's also mentioned in the video game GTA 5. It's everywhere. Everyone knows what it is. It's even mentioned in the TV show Lucifer. So everyone knows what Human Centipede is. This is the movie that got that idea going, and this is the movie that also skyrocketed director Tom Six's career. So between all of this, is the movie any good? And personally, I really don't think so. I know a lot of fans of the movie argue that, well, people are just too disturbed by that, they can't understand the plot. But I totally disagree. If anything, if you were more disturbed by this movie, you may find it more effective and enjoyable. Since I have a high tolerance, I found the movie to be just extremely boring. This is one of those movies that highly relies on the concept. I do give Tom Six credit for creating a really gross and unique concept that has not been seen on the big screen yet, but the execution of it is very poor, and let me get into why. First off, let's talk about character development and just characters in general. This movie definitely leads in comparison to the other two movies in having leads that you actually know. Both the two main girls in this movie are not necessarily likable, or you're not even necessarily cheering for them, but at least they're named and you get a little exposition that they're on a vacation. After that, you really don't care about what happens to them, and yeah, you're disturbed, and yeah, you don't hope any human gets thrown into a human centipede, but there's nothing specific about the characters that make them stand out, and you just view them as normal people, and nothing more, nothing less. The next issue I have with this movie would be the lack of structure. This movie does have a little bit of structure, as in it has a progression, as in they start here, they get stuck, they go to the house, and then stuff happens. But that progression only lasts about a third of the way through the movie. Also, the progression that leads them to the house where the crazy surgeon is built off of the most cliche horror tropes in existence. First of all, the broken car trope. Their car gets a flat tire, they can't drive. Second of all, the internet connection trope, where they have no cell service. Third off, the wandering into the person's house trope, where you just wander through and you get right to the bad person's house. Everything leads up to it too perfectly. Yeah, so basically it's just built off of common horror tropes. And that's another thing that makes this movie seem so cliche. But at least there's some progression. Now let's talk about the actual sequence where he creates them. And I would say this is kind of where the movie shines a little bit. I think it's very interesting. And the scene where they are all sitting strapped in their beds having to watch his plan and his presentation, I think that scene is actually a highlight in the movie. But the only reason that scene's a highlight is because it's about the concept. It's not about the characters. It's not about a plot. It's just purely about the concept. And I think that's why it's effective. After that, and after the human centipede is assembled, this movie loses everything it has going for it. Everything. There is no plot. The movie establishes pretty early on that they are not escaping the centipede and that they're either going to have to sacrifice themselves to be out of the misery, or they're just going to have to live in the form of a centipede. And that being said, you know they're not going anywhere. They can barely move as a centipede. They can barely do anything as a centipede. So really, it's just a ton of montages of Dr. Hyder either trolling them, trying to feed them dog food or whatever, or trying to get them to fetch a ball, things like that, showing them sleep in a cage. And this period is way too long. There needed to be something that happens. Having a couple scenes where they're the centipede would be fine, but the fact that basically the whole rest of the movie is them as a centipede is just boring. Then that moves to the finale of the movie where finally something happens, which two policemen come in and basically know something sketchy is happening there and tries to rescue them. But this scene is extremely short. And really, in the end, they all die, and the middle person left in the centipede is alive. It doesn't have a satisfying conclusion either. So as you can see, I really didn't like the first Human Centipede movie, and I'm feeling a D+ to a C- on this one. I do give him credit for thinking of a unique concept that hasn't been shown yet on the big screen yet, but I think everything else in this movie fails. Anything that has to do with the concept can be interesting, but it's surrounded by a ton of boring sequences. trope-filled sequences and lack of progression that this movie just doesn't cut it for me. Now it's time to talk about the second movie. This movie took everything I thought was good about the Human Centipede 1, stripped it away, and took everything I hated about the Human Centipede 1 and built off of that, but even to a bigger degree. This movie is literally plotless. It is the definition of plotless. Yeah, you could argue someone wanting to create a human centipede is a plot. Well, if that's a plot to you, then yes, this has, at very best, the most basic plot possible. But in my eyes, that is not a plot, rather than that is just an idea. Also, this movie is an hour and a half. The idea behind this movie could be like a 15-minute short, a 20-minute short. But instead, it stretches this idea out to an hour and a half, which makes this movie feel like it's 3.5 hours, even though it barely makes the runtime of an hour and a half of a feature film. Man, and the premise of this movie, is it a sequel to the first movie? No, and I get why, because there's not really much you can do based off of how we ended the first movie for a sequel. But I could see if the middle girl lived and her trying to revenge, or her being distraught and maybe going in a slightly different direction. But that's not the case. This is a what if scenario. And I get why he did that, as in there's a lot of online forums, there's a lot of hoaxes, there's a lot of ideas of what if a crazy person actually did this to someone. That would be scary. So this movie takes that idea of what if a crazy person was inspired by that first movie to create his own. And it is kind of an interesting idea, I guess. But again, it doesn't take that anywhere. Unlike the first movie, where there was at least some characters you got a little exposition on, this movie you get zero exposition on any characters. They're just random people at a garage center. And that is definitely an annoying thing, is that you care about none of these characters. They are extremely expendable. Yeah, he did make one of the characters pregnant, which I guess you care about her the most since she is pregnant. And while she does get away, still you don't know enough about her to really care about her. And that's another issue. Now let's talk about why I really hate this movie. While the concept of the human centipede is apparent in this movie, that is not the main goal of this movie. The main goal of this movie is to be as gory as possible. And it also builds off of more disturbing ideas like rape and stuff like that. In my eyes, situations that should not be put in such an absurd and kind of movie that feels just like a meme. I don't think that that was appropriate. And really, it's just to make it more disturbing than the first. How can I top the first movie? I'll have the human centipede plus a ton of these terrible topics that should not be discussed, and let's throw that on top to make it even more disturbing. The end is literally the beginning. He starts working at the garage, he does all this stuff, it fails, so it ends with him back in the garage. There isn't really a finale or end, and it's awful. I'm gonna give Human Centipede 2 an F. No doubt that is an F. So now let's move to the final movie. Before I even watched this movie, I could tell it was the grand finale. Not only did I hear that Tom Six makes his first appearance in the movies, but it also brings back the main two villains of the previous movies, Dieter Laser and Lawrence R. Harvey, and they are main characters in this movie. And it also includes a couple more big name actors, such as Eric Roberts, and the production value seemed to be increased. So between all these things, I assumed that this movie would be a major step up from the second, and it definitely is not. I do think this movie does barely nudge above the second movie as better, only because of those reasons. And for someone that was a fan of the previous two movies, they would love this movie, as it kind of takes little elements from both the previous movies. Also, this movie does have a clear progression. Hey, crazy prison warden's doing a terrible job at running this prison. The mayor's disappointed. He says they have 2 weeks to get something together, fix it up, or they're losing their jobs and they're closing the prison. So they have to come up with a strategy to deal with their prison inmates that are really misbehaved. So there is a clear story and a clear progression in this movie, which is an improvement upon the second movie. Also, something I thought was interesting of this movie is that they didn't go with making the human centipede immediately, and it was saved for the end. I also like that about this movie. So again, between all these elements going on, Tom Six making his first appearance, clear progression, it should be good, but it is not. This movie is horrible. It is so offensive that I cannot like it. This movie also seems like a meme. Every scene in this movie seems like a meme. All the dialogue in this movie is a meme. all the prison scenes as a meme. Even the music comes across as a meme. In scenes that are supposed to be disturbing, it really comes across as just funny, but I didn't even think it was funny. This movie is going for more of a comedy, which I guess is okay, but it doesn't work. From really any way you view this movie, it doesn't work. I did not think the Human Centipede 3 did much improvement from the second, just because, again, it's a ton of gross sequences the whole first movie. Except this movie digs into topics like mistreatment of women, racial slurs against the black community, things like that, which really make it not good. And I just cannot believe how bad this movie is, especially knowing that from the super negative feedback Tom Six got from the second, I would hope that he would try to do something with a more interesting story. And again, while the third movie does have higher production value, does have the previous stars of the last two movies, Tom Six makes his appearance, has Eric Roberts, an actor from The Dark Knight, all these elements can't fix the absurd characters, zero characters that you care about, not much of a story. And again, like I said, there is a progression. So while it does nudge above the second movie, since there is at least somewhat of a plot there, it's not an interesting enough plot to keep you invested the whole movie. Offensive, absurd, absolutely strange. The only time I could see someone liking this movie, again, is if they were fans of the previous two movies. But if you're actually looking for a good movie, this is not the case. And I'm feeling an F to a D- on this movie. Yes, guys, those are my overall thoughts of all the previous movies. Thank you guys for watching. Like if you like, dislike if you dislike it. And I also want to address that I really want you guys to put some recommendations in the comments. What do you guys want to see me do next? What review do you want me to do next? Please let me know. I want to know what you guys want to see, because while I might do some of the ones I want to see, I know my taste in movies isn't everybody's taste. So I'd like to see what people really want to see and what's the most common movie people want to see me do next. But that's it. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I am out. Peace.